Good afternoon, good evening, and also good morning, everyone. Some of you know me already. Arash Babai, CPO of the Siegwerk Group. I'm taking care of, together with my team, our global procurement activities. And I'm pleased to open the session today on sustainable procurement here at Siegwerk. Let's directly jump into the agenda. What can you expect today? Obviously, I'm opening the session. We have Nicolas Wiedmann today in here, CEO of Siegwerk Group, and he will tell you why sustainability at Siegwerk is important. Why are we doing this? What is the impact on our organization? We also have Alina Mam here, Head of Global Sustainability and Circular Economy. She will elaborate a bit on why you are important on this journey if it comes to our sustainability strategy. Also in town, Kathleen Hansom, Global Supplier Sustainability Manager. She will give us a deep dive on our carbon reduction targets, expectations, and also the support you can expect from us. And then Alina will take over and also run a deep dive session on the topic of human and labor rights. We will have a Q&A session. I will come to the details in just a minute on the next slide, and then I have the pleasure to close this session today. So before we start, some housekeeping topics. Slides will be distributed after the event, so you will get everything what you can see today. You will be on mute. We do have a Q&A session, so please post your questions in the chat. We will collect them and then afterwards answer them in our Q&A session. And afterwards, you will also receive a feedback form. So please tell us what you think. Yeah, be honest, be open. We are also developing on this journey, and your opinion is here really highly appreciated. So before I give the microphone and the video to Nicolas, 2 slides from my side, embarking on a journey towards sustainability together. What you see here is, I call it the holy trinity of procurement. Yeah. So this is what generates the value. This is the value we together generate for our customers. Security of supply, you could say most important, cost management. We want to stay competitive, and access to superior quality and innovation from the supply market. So this is the core, this is the fundament of our business. This is why we exist in the procurement department, and this is what we typically discuss when we negotiate, when we have contracts, when we do sampling, when we have interaction. So this core expectations we are going to extend. And now you see the trinity becomes a quartet. We have still cost and supply, we have quality, and we are adding sustainability here. Are they all equally important? I have to say, yes, they are. However, there is a differentiator. Supply and costs are commercial topics we can negotiate, and we do negotiate, day by day, week by week. The topic of sustainability, and I take one example, human rights violation and the value chain. These are topics which we don't negotiate. Or if it comes to quality, impurities with toxic substances, we also don't negotiate. So they just have to be there. So this is the difference between the 2 topics at the bottom and at the right, and the other topics at the top and on the left side. Supply and cost to be agreed and to be negotiated. Sustainability and quality, just something what we need to do our business. Does that mean, and now specifically on the sustainability topic, that we are already there where we need to be? No. Does it mean that you have to be somewhere now immediately? Also no. It's a journey. It's a journey for us. I believe it's also a journey for you, and we invite you to embark on this journey, to support us, to also drive the journey. And be part of the journey. This is the expectation, and this is also the topic of today's webinar. And now I will close my part and hand over to Nicolas, who will give you more insights about the why. Hi, Nicolas.
Thank you so much, Arash. Very clear. And hello, everyone, also from my side. Very warm welcome to everybody joining us. And thanks, team, for inviting me and being part also here of this session. It's a very important topic, but also a topic that is particularly close to my heart. So it's really a pleasure to join and share a few thoughts that I have, why actually sustainability is such an important topic for Siegwerk, but I would say even for everybody of us. And if you start, as we always do in business, to look at what sustainability means, I would like to start with a definition to myself what sustainable business means. And it is basically long-term value creation. So that might sound a bit surprising to you at the beginning, but it's long-term value creation by being environmentally responsible, by being socially responsible, and also, of course, being economically successful. And only if you do all three things together, we are really making long-term progress and creating long-term value sustainably. Or you could also rephrase it and simplify a little bit. Sustainable business is about minimizing the negative impacts and maximizing the positive contributions of business to environment, to society, and of course also to economy. And how that looks like at Siegwerk, you can see on the next slide, which is actually not working here. Now, here we go. Thank you for that, colleagues, because the Siegwerk sustainable business development journey started already more than 200 years ago. And this is how Siegwerk looked like at these times. If you look at the pictures on the left side, black and white images from the early start out of Siegwerk. Last year, we celebrated our 200th anniversary. And we started out as a family-owned company just here right at the gates of Cologne in Germany. Still today, we are a 100% family-owned company. In the meanwhile, in the 6th generation, handing it over to the 7th generation, and still are based here in Germany with our headquarters. But over these sustainable business journey over the last 200 years, we developed quite significantly, as you can see here on this slide. So, of course, we're not still in a manual working mode. We are following, of course, the technology roadmaps. We are automated, we are digitized, and we had the pleasure to also spread out globally and expand our business. So in the meanwhile, our business is 1.3 billion in revenues large. We are more than 5,000 Siegwerkers across the globe. More than 1,000 of them are faced on technology and supply and product development. So a highly innovative and driven and dedicated company. We are present in more than 35 countries. We are serving basically all the large markets in the world, more than 100 markets, and always with a clear focus on long-term sustainability of business development. Yeah, having said that, we as a player of the ink and coatings industry, mainly dedicated for packaging, you find most of our products when you actually shop the supermarket. And you will see not our brand name on the products, but basically a lot of them as we display here on this slide. So usually you find our inks and coatings on packaging of products for food, for drinks, for detergents, for sweets, and you name it, all across the different products we experience as an end consumer. And the end consumer behavior, so our behavior, is also changing over time. So sustainable packaging, sustainable products become more and more a license to operate, to be successful for the brand owners in the market, because we as the end consumers demand it. And the brands, of course, are passing it along to their suppliers. And of course, there is a lot of change in the regulatory side. I would say as dynamic as it has never been over the last decades. So, for example, we are seeing extended producer responsibility. So meaning being end-to-end responsible for all the cost of a producer that comes along with a product, including also end-of-life treatment. We see regulations coming for design, for recyclability or compostability. For example, in Europe, the Green Deal that is to come, or the PPWR that is changing significantly the products and also the packaging of the products. And we focus more and more on the regulation side, also on human rights, of course, and the responsibility for the entire supply chain. Just to mention here our supply chain due diligence law that is coming. And last but not least, mandatory sustainability reporting. Think, for example, of the CSRD that is coming. But we have to say we are not focusing here so much on the reporting side, as the colleagues will explain later to you. We want to focus jointly with you on measurable impact of improving the sustainable footprint of our products and the entire supply chain. It's an end-to-end journey, as Arash named it, also for all of us over the next years. And if you look at that supply chain, you could imagine it to be like a tree. At the end, we want to focus on sustainable products, so to say, the fruits of the tree, the tasteful tree, and they can only exist if the entire tree is actually healthy. And that requires the leaves, the branches, the trunk, and of course also the roots. And if you look alongside here downstream, our supply chain, that includes everybody, starting with you from the very beginning on the raw material side, us as producers for inks and coatings, and of course also substrate manufacturers for the packaging industry, the packages itself and the printers, and then last but not least, the brands that actually package their goods and deliver it to the end consumers. And only if the entire supply chain works together, at the end consumer can benefit from that in protecting ourselves, in protecting the planet. And of course, let's not forget, we also want to be competitive and successfully in the economic sense. And this comes together, as I explained, only if we're responsibly on the environmental and social side as well. And this is exactly the reason why we initiated that project. SustainUP, going forward, upstream sustainability jointly and together with you, end-to-end perspective in a measurable way. And the main focus, beginning, will be to focus on the supplier development to reduce the environmental and human rights risks, and also specifically the decarbonization of our upstream supply chain. So thanks a lot from my side already for you joining this journey with us. And now I hand over again to my colleagues who will explain you how we want to do this together with you. Thank you very much. Halina, your turn.
Thank you. So in the coming few minutes, I'll try to give you a bit of perspective how your role as suppliers feeds into Siegwerk's sustainability strategy to give you a taste of where you are in the picture now and going forward. So at Siegwerk, we look at sustainability from two perspectives. So one part is the operational perspective. So how do we produce the goods that we put into the market? But of course, the picture is not complete without looking actually at the products and the product value proposition. And if this is not sustainable, I don't think you can honestly claim to be a sustainable company. And this is the second pillar of how we look at sustainability at Siegwerk, is through a product lens. What do we produce? And here, as you can imagine, your contribution as suppliers is more important than in any other space, because sustainable products start with sustainable procurement, sustainable raw materials. Let's dive a bit deeper into those two notions of what we produce and how we produce. In 2021, we've launched HorizonNOW, which is our sustainability strategy with key measurable targets that we want to achieve by 2025, end of 2025, so the time is ticking. And I'm not going to go through all the details of those targets. I just want to highlight those where you as suppliers already have been part of the journey. And I'll start with operations and supply chain. So number one, here we ask all of our suppliers to commit to the key principles of the UN Global Compact. And you successfully did so. So roughly 99 or more than 99% of our suppliers have committed to the principles, which include aspects of environmental protection, social aspects, but also modes of ethical business conduct, for example, anti-bribery. Of course, this is only on a very high level, but it's a really good starting point for us and our collaboration. If we look at product safety and responsibility, so moving to the product side of things, this is really an essential claim and promise that we give to the market, that our products are safe to use in food packaging applications, so high sensitive applications. And you as suppliers are, of course, part of this promise. And as Arash already mentioned, impurities, for example, are things that are non-negotiable, especially because we want to keep that safety promise. And then if you look at circular economy, so also a value proposition of our products, this is where you have also been playing a role in the past. For example, if we think to the switch to more bio-based raw materials. So as you can see, suppliers, you have already been part of our sustainability journey so far. But time is ticking and 2025 is coming to an end and times are moving. So now we're looking at the journey to 2030 with you. So we're in the midst of developing our sustainability strategy 2026 to 2030. And in this, you as suppliers will have a more prominent role, a more important role to play even, which is also why we decided to launch SustainUP to make sure we streamline these efforts. 2 areas of focus, Nicholas already mentioned those. One is we've set a SBTi validated target of reducing emissions from purchased goods and services by 25% by 2030. SBTi is the Science-Based Target Initiative, which validates climate targets against the latest scientific standards. On the human and labor rights side, we've decided to put the center stage on the agenda and make sure we take a more active role in protecting the people that are actually part of our supply chains to ensure that whatever we put on the market doesn't harm people, but ideally even creates opportunity for people along the way. So SustainUP, together we have to do this upstream. It starts with you to achieve those targets. Looking at human rights and labor rights, again, here we want to move towards de-risking our supply chain, making sure there's as little risk as possible on the people in the supply chain. Because risk can so easily translate into actual incidents. And we unfortunately see that not only in our industry, but in other industries as well. So being risk averse here really pays off. And I've already mentioned the climate target. What you'll be seeing in more detail in the next 2 parts on carbon presented by Kathleen and human rights by myself again is a call to transparency and action. Transparency, we need to know what's happening in our supply chain, in our upstream supply chain on a human rights side so that we can collaboratively address those issues. And on carbon, we need to know how much carbon we're sort of sourcing in with the raw materials that you provide to us. We need to know what are your climate actions to decarbonize and ultimately also contribute to our goal. And then transparency is nice, but action has to follow. So how can we develop joint areas of action and all do our part in the supply chain to ultimately create a more sustainable industry? And with no further ado, I'll hand over to Kathleen, who will dive into carbon in more detail and give you the playbook for this.
Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining. As Aline mentioned, I will dive a bit deeper into the topic of carbon emissions and especially their reduction. So we will talk about our own targets, but also on the roadmaps and the topics that we would like to support you with. Don't be scared. This is not your screensaver gone wild. This is actually the global average temperature change since 1850. And 2024 was the hottest year recorded in history, with exceeding the 1.5 degrees Celsius target for the first time. So you see, it is getting really hot and we need to do something now. But even moreover, if you're looking further into the future, the cost of climate change and especially of being inactive is becoming really, really challenging. So a study showed that by 2050, the global income will reduce by 19% due to climate change. And the issue with this is that it will hit low-income countries especially hard, but also those countries which have emitted the least carbon, which is kind of unfair. On the other side, if we would decide to do something, it shows that the costs that we have with climate change are 6 times higher than if we would invest now into reducing it and limiting the warming to 2%. So that's a bit theoretical, but what does it actually mean to us, Siegwerk, to you as suppliers, to us as humans? All of you experience droughts, high temperatures all across the world. And a study from Brazil, there were droughts in 2014 and 2021, showed that the height of sugarcane reduces by 20% due to drought conditions. And more recent studies I found are even going up to 40 to 50%. So this is agricultural yield that is missing for the products that you're producing, but also in the food systems that are feeding the global population. If we're looking into our workers, it's getting hotter and hotter. There's something that's called the wet bulb temperature, and that is a temperature at which the human body is not able to cool itself anymore. So even when you're in the shade, or if you have plenty of water, sweating doesn't cut it anymore. You're overheating, and you could have a heat stroke. And by 2070, there are recent studies showing that in South of Asia, so India, Thailand, Indonesia, there will be several days a year where this wet bulb temperature will be exceeded. And knowing many of the factories, they're open, there's no air conditioning, it's almost impossible to install air conditioning anymore. So this will be quite a challenge how to operate under these conditions. And then something from Europe. I mean, we see it in the news very, very recently. This picture is from Valencia in Spain from last October. There were extensive rainfalls and a huge flood affecting 23,000 businesses. Most of them were small and medium-sized enterprises. And they calculated the economic loss, and I wrote down the number. It's 16 billion euros of loss. And just to give you a feeling, you could buy 400,000 electric cars for that. Just emphasizing that doing something is a lot cheaper than just bearing the cost of and waiting what happens. So I would like to discuss a little bit what Siegwerk is doing. First, I dive a little bit into the carbon reduction methodology, let's call it. Carbon emissions are classified into 3 scopes, 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 and 2 are emissions that a company is basically emitting themselves in their internal operations. So scope 2 is, for example, lighting, heating, electricity that they buy. Scope 1 are other internal emissions like VOC or things that getting burned, things like that. And Siegwerk has put quite ambitious targets, as Alina has explained, also validated by science. So until 2030, we want to reduce our internal emissions by 42% and become net zero compliant by 2050. And now what is relevant for you? So there's scope 3. Scope 3 mainly consists of raw materials that we buy, and 93% of the total emissions by Siegwerk are from the raw materials that we're buying. And here we have set the target of 25% reduction by 2030, but also to become net zero by 2050. How do we want to do this? So we thought about an engagement strategy and support with you, our suppliers. The first important thing is just getting started. I really love those quotes, which don't apply just to carbon reductions, but I think also generally in business. The best time to act was yesterday, but the second best time to act is now. And the other one is the longer you wait, the more expensive it becomes, and the more it will cost. If you start looking into your own carbon emissions right now, the change will be easier than if you put it off for another 5 years. Or if you make your operations future-proof to withstand, for example, high temperatures. Siegwerk has actually started its journey towards sustainability about 5 years ago. And I think we have come quite a bit and learned a lot during that time. However, we would like to collaborate with you. So we would like to share our experience, but we know that many of you might be much further on this journey. They might have learned things we don't know yet, or some of you might have really pragmatic, easy, good ideas to make a change. So we want to talk to you, exchange, and go on this journey together. However, when you're setting targets, you also need to measure. To measure targets, you need data transparency. And here I'd like to dive into the topic of product carbon footprint, or PCF, how it's being called. A PCF is basically the calculation of how much of 1 kg of your product, how much carbon is being emitted. So you remember the scope 1, 2, and 3. That is basically an overall picture of your company. This is being broken down to a single product. We as Siegwerk have worked on it over the last years, and we now are able to supply our customers with the PCF. And trust me, we regularly ask because they are on the journey with us. Part of this PCF is first, of course, the scope 3 of that specific product. So mainly the raw materials being bought. Then the transport to the Siegwerk gate. Then our Siegwerk scope 1 and 2 that we're emitting during the production process, and also the transport towards the customer gate. So we call that cradle-to-gate approach. There are other approaches like anticipating the carbon that is being emitted through the use of our products at the customer, or at the end of life of the product, so of the packaging, like recycling, burning, or whatever is being done. Getting scope 1 and 2 is, let's say, relatively easily manageable because it's under our own control. We have the data, so let's say not easy but manageable. Getting scope 3 was a challenge for us because we do not have, or for most products, we do not have product-specific PCF. So we were employing databases like EcoInvent, EVA Institute, and things like that, where you can look up the raw materials that you are using at the production process that is being done, and then gives you an average number of how much carbon is emitted. And on the right side, you see a sheet that we are currently able to do for all our 100,000 plus products. For each of the products, what is the carbon footprint of that specific product? And that is what we will be asking of you. As mentioned before, we have validated targets, but we have also validated the calculation of our product carbon footprint. We mentioned SBTi before, but our calculation is also greenhouse gas protocol compliant, and we've also gone through an extensive audit from ISO, so we're ISO 14067 compliant. As mentioned, we're now taking the journey together with you, so please start calculating your PCF, because we will need it and you will need it to track the targets and the achievements. Once you have them, please send them to us, and we have an expert team who is vetting the data and giving you feedback if this is the quality that we require, or if maybe some additional detail is needed. And coming to the last pillar that we have, we would like to offer some support as well. And there are different things that we can offer you. So we're employing EcoVadis, and in specific, the EcoVadis Carbon Action Module. This can, when you use it, it can help you to calculate your own scope 1 and 2. There's a calculator included. I find that quite nice. And it also guides you on how to set measurable targets and meaningful ones. By answering the carbon questionnaire, it also does an automatic maturity analysis and then puts out a roadmap for you. What would be impactful next steps that you can prioritize? And over the years, you can also then do the progress tracking on how's your carbon emissions developing and track it against your targets. Other things that we will offer. As I mentioned, PCF is a challenging target, but it is doable. We're looking into sharing our own experience and, for example, having webinars in showing you how we, in detail, started on that PCF journey. What are the systems that we used? What were the Excel sheets we had? How do we navigate through the databases? That will be following in the later of the year. But after the session, we will also be sending out a questionnaire and asking for your feedback. And please give us ideas on what would be support topics for webinars that you would think are meaningful and would really help you on your journey. We're also looking to other exchange and support, like drop-in clinics for the PCF, but also having one-to-one exchanges with suppliers from whom we're buying, I call that not a lot of raw materials, but a lot of carbon, so which are relatively high on our carbon portfolio. So these are the pillars for engagement. And yeah, I think this is a good way to start. It is a journey that we need to do together. And together we can also build a low carbon supply chain. As I mentioned, the best way to start is now, the best time. So we need to commit, and then we really need to turn our commitment into action. So, and with these words, I would like to hand over to Alina for the human rights part.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you for the deep dive into carbon. I will try to follow suit with giving you also a bit more details on human and labor rights and what our expectations are towards you, but also how we can support you in this journey. So let me state one thing first. There is probably no supply chain in this world that doesn't have human and labor rights issues. And I think this is really important to understand because this means it's relevant for all of us. And it also means we don't have to be afraid that something comes up because every supply chain has one or the other or more issues. And I'll try to sort of give you a few examples on what kind of issues could occur in the supply chain. And with that also demonstrating a bit what does human and labor rights actually mean in the business context. So first of all, if we think about human rights, we can think about the very basic things like no child labor. I think this makes sense to everybody. But it also means that you're in a spot where you can choose your employment freely. That means entering employment, but also exiting employment freely. So there shouldn't be any indicators for forced labor and modern slavery. And these are big words, but it could mean something like you paid a recruitment fee that you have to pay back before you can actually leave the job. This could mean somebody has hold of your passport, so you can't really leave without that documents back. Land rights is another good example, especially connected to indigenous communities. If you have projects, for example, you build a new factory, a new mine, and you need that land, how can you safeguard the rights of the people on this ground? Another aspect we would like to pick out is the protection of people actually standing up for human and environmental rights. These people need to be protected. If you look at our supply chain in the packaging space, we have child labor, for example, at the very end of the supply chain, looking at children working at dump sites, for example, collecting waste. But we also see indicators of forced labor in the agricultural space. So for us, bio-based materials, things we need to address jointly. Another category falls sort of within to labor practices and standards. Here you can think about examples such as reasonable working hours. The International Labor Organization, which is one of the main bodies here, says maximum 60 hours a week. It's also important that people are paid fairly, meaning the amount of money that they're being paid to actually afford their life, but also timely. if you're on a low income, any day that you don't receive this income can really have detrimental effects because you might not be able to pay your rent. You might not be able to pay school fees on time, having a real life effect on you as a family. Also, there's power within numbers. So the freedom of association is something that is really important as a right in labor practices and standards. Workplaces should be free of discrimination, harassment, and abuse for no matter what reason. Let it be gender, let it be sexual orientation, cultural backgrounds, religion, it does not matter. It should be free of those issues. The other thing that is important, that if something happens, that workers actually have access to grievance channels so that they can raise topics anonymously if they were so, and that if something happens, that remediation takes place. So for example, if salaries weren't high enough, that this is paid in backward salaries, just to give you an example. Again, here, if we look into our industry, we do tend to sometimes exceed reasonable working hours because we all want to deliver on time and with maximum reliability, but also for a lot of people, it means they can actually increase their income if they work more. So this is something we have to look at systematically. Human and labor rights in a business context also means operational health and safety. This includes anything from proper PPE, making sure that you have risk assessments for the workplace. And it will become even more important because aspects such as climate change, as Kathleen mentioned, actually increase the risk that workers are exposed to in a work environment, for example, by heat. And this link between environmental standards and human rights also continues in the last part. There's some areas where workers need additional protection, where communities need additional protection. This, for example, could be if you think about handling highly hazardous chemicals. You want to protect your workers even more. And you also, for example, want to make sure that none of these chemicals leak into rivers that are used as water sources for local communities. So I hope this made it a bit more tangible what human and labor rights are in a business setting and gave you a few examples on how this could be already present in our supply chain. You can now think of any other supply chain that you're a part of as a consumer. You can think about chocolate, you can think about your car, and with those examples in mind, you will probably find other challenges and other risks in other supply chains as well. It's an issue that we have everywhere. And because it's an issue that we have everywhere, there has been more and more focus on it. And actually right now it's becoming really into this license to operate. And Nicholas already mentioned that in his introduction. This license to operate comes from two perspectives that of course are linked. So one is market demands. So what is the market doing? And then also regulatory pressure. I'm going to start with the market. So in the past, you've seen probably human rights more as a niche topic, if at all. I just picked two examples here. There are probably many more examples of niche. Tony's Chocolonely, which is a Dutch brand. They make excellent chocolate. And they also entered the market with a specific claim and promise that their chocolate is free of modern slavery, because chocolate is a space with a lot of issues. Fair trade is not sort of one brand, but a certification body that looks deeper into working standards, social standards, and brands can certify, qualify certain products from their portfolio. You might have seen that sort of within the fruit space, for example. So this has been niche, catered to consumers that might be specifically aware about it. But niche has become large scale because we see all the big brands engaging in human rights. And you see this through their commitments to the UN Global Compact, for example, that we mentioned earlier, but also to the Sustainable Development Goals also set by the UN. And they translate that into actions. So they check if their suppliers, so our customers, us and potentially you, actually adhere to the codes of conduct and the standards that they set. They actively engage and promote projects and initiatives around living wage, training their supply chain, training their suppliers. And also more and more have concrete targets, because even though it's something that addresses people, you can measure how well you're doing due diligence on human rights in the supply chain. And because the big brands are doing it, it's starting to trickle down, or it started to trickle down the supply chain, reaching our customers. You see a few converters there, and printers reaching us, and now it's reaching you. And then there's regulatory pressure, and of course they're linked. If the market is moving, it's much easier for regulation to move, and vice versa. What are some key trends here in the regulatory space? So one is that there's more and more mandatory due diligence actions in the supply chain, which look at transparency, creating transparency, but also really moving to action. So exactly what we're doing today here is part of that. We're also seeing import bans, so that actually governments say, you know what, your product is not allowed in our market because it has a heightened or proven human rights issue. We see that with the EU forced labor regulation, but also, for example, in the US with the Uyghur Act. The other thing that we're seeing quite nicely is that actually existing laws are also executed more stringently, enforced more stringently, which is really important because otherwise they're just lame ducks. We see this a lot now in Brazil, where the existing regulatory framework is used to really exert more control on companies in high-risk areas. So human rights as carbon is part of this license to operate, and this is also why we've put it on the agenda. I said that every supply chain has human rights issues, and I want to back that up a little bit with numbers. So if you look at the right side of the slide, status, if we look, and that's what we did, at our suppliers, specifically raw material and packaging suppliers, 52% fall in a category of high or very high risk. Where we want to move to, of course, is to have as little risk as possible in our supply chain. Because as mentioned, risk can quickly translate into actual incidents. So our target here is that by 2030, we reduce the high-risk suppliers by 95%. We are aware that there will always be a risk, so understand these 95% really as our ambition to move towards a supply chain that is free of risk as much as possible. You might wonder, well, what is high risk? You see these 52%. Well, there's method behind this, of course. So Kathleen already mentioned that we're deploying EcoVadis as our supplier management tool, and they offer a rating system that we're now incorporating as part of this, this assessment. You get an overall score. If this overall score is below 25, you fall as a supplier within a high-risk category. This score is comprised of 4 different topics. There are environmental factors in there, because environment and human and labor rights are linked. Then, of course, there's labor and human rights. There's ethics, which includes things like anti-bribery, anti-corruption, ethical business practices. And there's sustainable procurement, because, of course, it's advisable that whatever we do here with you, you pass on to your suppliers to really have this systematic change. And the scoring looks at different things, but mainly policies. So what's your governance structure, targets, what's your ambition, and what are you actually doing to get there, measures, so the action part. So similar to Kathleen, what she explained with carbon, also for human rights, we have an engagement model. And it's really important here also, it always takes 2 to tango. So this is really something that's based on collaboration. There are 4 steps in total, which I'll walk you through in a bit more detail now. So first of all, we as Siegwerk set standards and expectations. You will find those in our human rights policy, but also very much concretely in our business partner code of conduct, which comes with a sustainability checklist. And for you as suppliers, this is one of the key documents we want to put your attention to. So once we've set those standards and expectations, we move towards assessing the risk and prioritizing suppliers. And the 52% that you saw here, that was based on what's called an abstract risk assessment. So basically what we did for all of our suppliers, we assessed the risk abstractly, meaning not on a supplier-specific level, but looking at industry risk and country risk, and that sort of gives you a score. For us, this is really important as a first step because it allows us to identify high-risk areas and focus our resources and capacities on those high-risk areas in terms of engagement. Because if we would try to cover all the suppliers at the same time, that would be quite a mammoth task. So with those focused suppliers, we want to monitor specific supplier performance. So now it's really about you specifically with a specific risk analysis. And this again leads back to the scorecard that I showed. And here the hurdle rate is 25 points. And we also have a media screening. So we want to make sure that we stay up to date, that we know what's happening. And that feeds into our overall understanding of risk patterns, but of course also might be specific to you because you had an incident in one of your plants. In some cases, we will do on-site audits. Now that we have the score and an understanding of the specific risk, it's all about actions for improvement and support. So here we offer supplier capacity building. These will be webinars. These will be specific projects, details to follow. And if there are areas of improvement, and quite frankly, our expectation will be that there are areas of improvement, putting together development plans that we can follow up collaboratively. In all this, also the worker's voice. So your workers are really important as a feedback mechanism for us. So also we have a grievance mechanism that is open to all. So what does that mean for you? It means that upon invite, so you will receive this step by step. You don't have to move to action now without the invite. Just wait until we approach you. But as we view and accept the business partner code of conduct. If we approach you because we identified an incident, be transparent and prompt in your reply. If you're invited, do the EcoVadis scoring or share your scorecard if you already have one. Establish the development plans and execute on them if you're invited. And also participate in the capacity building programs. I mentioned a lot about collaboration, and this is one of the key guiding principles that we have. So everything that you saw in this process, so the 4 steps, is basically built on our human rights guiding principles. I will not go through all of them. I just want to highlight a few. One is commitment and aspiration. And this ultimately means we as Siegwerk have the commitment and the aspiration to be free of human and labor rights risks in our supply chain. We know this is a journey, but this is our commitment. This is where we want to get to. So this is also why you find a 95% reduction target. By doing so, we don't want to be blind. We want to acknowledge risk. We know that there's risk, and we really want to understand this risk together with you, because only then is our commitment and our aspiration meaningful. Otherwise, it's just thin air. One other thing I want to highlight, number 5, is stakeholder focus. So of course, we talked about the business narrative quite a bit, but at the end of the day, it's about the people. It's about the person who might be subject to human and labor rights violation. It's about the mother or the father that cannot pay for the school fees for their children because they're below a living wage. And this is who we're here to protect in these actions. The last thing I want to highlight here is last resort measures, number 6. So, of course, collaboration is key, and this is a journey. And therefore, we will never disengage immediately if you raise proactively also issues that you have in the supply chain. Quite the opposite. We're very appreciative about it, and we will use this as a chance to grow together and develop together. However, in cases where we approach you and there's no response, there's no follow-up on development plans, this engagement or pausing a business relationship remains a last resort measure that we will also pull if it is necessary, but it will never be our first reaction. So in addition to those guiding principles, another key aspect or foundational part is the business partner code of conduct. And it really translates these guiding principles into concrete expectations towards you and standard setting. And it has two parts. You'll find a QR code there if you want to dive into detail. So first of all, as mentioned, the business partner code of conduct defines the expectation towards you as our suppliers, as our business partners. It does have a binding character, so it shall create commitment. It shouldn't just be sort of a set of pages. And that is also why we'll include it into our standard terms and conditions. And this is also why we ask you to review and sign it. So that's a deliberate process. The other part is the sustainability checklist. And here we really try to make it as practically usable a code of conduct as possible. So if you're new to the area, the sustainability checklist really gives you a point-by-point description of what we mean when we, for example, talk about working hours. And you can use this to actually do a first own assessment of how are you faring in these different areas. We've actually used this sustainable checklist to do our own internal human rights risk assessment. On both of these documents, there will also be training coming up. And with this, I want to invite everybody back in for some Q&A. If you haven't done so yet, write your questions in. Brings me to the end of human rights and the Q&A session. And I've seen there was a little bit of action, but I'll hand over to Arash to moderate this part. And well, I think we're all going to try to squeeze into the screen. Let's see if this works.
Thank you, Alina. Yes. The two of us definitely fit. That's already good. Good. So I will read what I see in the chat, and then we basically address the questions to individuals here and try to answer them. Okay. I start with the first one. PCF calculation sounds very complex and costly. If a company doesn't have the tools or people for this, what to do? I may give this
Probably
one
me.
to you.
Yes. So yes, you're right. It's you see me, yeah. Yeah, it is not an easy feast, but we also managed ourselves. And I mentioned before that we're giving a couple of tools for you also to support. I would say the most important thing to start is calculating your own carbon footprint. So this is the scope 1 and scope 2. This is not that complicated because you have control over your own operations. Usually you have KPIs. That's not really an issue. And I really urge you to use the EcoVadis Carbon Action Module because it helps you going through the process. So start with this one. And then once you have that, set targets, how you want to reduce those. And then your next step would be looking into the scope 3. Because then you have to have an overview of your own raw materials, how they're made, and all these kinds of things. EcoVadis helps you a little bit, but what we're also going to do later in the year is having some webinars to show you how we approach this topic. And I think that will then also help you. It's manageable.
I think the second question goes in a similar direction. Is it sufficient to state that a product carbon footprint has been calculated in accordance with ISO 14067, or is a third-party verification of the result also requested?
No, we're requesting not the third-party verification. However, we have an expert team who would look into the details of the data. So giving us just one number is not enough because we need to validate it. But if, and we can share the details, if you give a detailed, let's say the details down of the different scopes of the subcategories, but also if you're describing us how you calculated it, then our experts can vet it and could say, yes, it is okay, or it is not okay. And if it's not okay, we will tell you what maybe needs to get changed.
Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, the last one is rather a request than a question. Yeah. Kindly keep a special detailed seminar for PCF and EcoVadis so we can understand and act upon them in timely manner. Yeah, I think that's a good thing. Yeah, good. Next question. Are you going to share the specific score with the respective suppliers? I think this is related to the risk assessment.
Actually, it's the other way around. You share your score with us. And I think this is the beauty and also one of the reasons why we decided to use EcoVadis as a platform, because you get a scorecard with full transparency on where did you perform well, where areas of improvement, and you then share that with us so we can use it. That also means you can share the scorecard with other customers of yours. So it's really intended not to be only a one-to-one interaction, but we want to make sure that the effort that you put into it, you can leverage for your improvement, but also with other customers in the supply chain. So the answer is yes, a lot of transparency will be there.
Yeah, and maybe I also comment on that to have it clear for everybody in the group. The abstract risk analysis, which Alina mentioned, the 52% of high and very high risk suppliers which you have seen is only based on geography and industry. So it has nothing to do with you in specific, and it is also not based on a scoring. Yeah, so we will go through the scoring to evaluate the actual risk. Yeah, so mining in Sierra Leone automatically probably gives a high risk. Yeah, just because of geography and the industry. I think it's important to keep this in mind. Yeah.
And if you're interested specifically where you rank on the abstract risk assessment, we're also of course happy to share this. This is not secret data. It's just not something that we spam all the inboxes with because it functions for prioritization.
Yeah. I already rated on the EcoVadis platform. Do we need to go through the sustainability checklist?
No, clear answer. So our preferred way is always the EcoVadis platform. If you've already done it, perfect. And then we can look at your scorecard. We might get back to you to understand the scorecard a bit better, but you don't have to go through the sustainability checklist. I do still encourage you to look at it because it provides, of course, more detail on the human and labor rights aspect specifically.
Thanks, Alina. So we jump back to the topic of product carbon footprint. Is this enough for you now, or will we need an EPD or LCA in the future?
No, for us, a PCF is completely sufficient, but of course we have to vet the quality of the data because there's different ways to calculate, and it needs to be credible in the end so that we can use it.
Can I just maybe add to that? So we as Siegwerk, we actually provide, if our customers ask, other environmental indicators as well for our products. But we also want to make sure that we take step by step on this journey. And carbon right now is the most important for many different reasons. And that's why we're focusing on them. For LCAs, if there's partnership across the value chain, for example, if you're interested in doing an LCA and you want to sort of maybe need some data from us, how your products perform, please feel free to approach us. It's just not something that we do systematically for all our products because they're very comprehensive, they're very specific, and we have roughly 140,000 products in our portfolio, so it would be quite a task.
Good, thank you, Alina. There's a comment to check the QR codes if they work or not. We will do so. Yeah. Next one is interesting. It goes even deeper in the value chain. So in case we would not obtain Scope 3 emission data from our suppliers, how could you support us?
Yes, so that will be one of the webinars, which later in the year we will start, because we have the same issue. Well, some suppliers can give us product-specific PCFs, but most are not that far. That's why we employed the databases. I mentioned EcoInvent, for example, and that is something then to look into to get the data for your raw materials and to calculate Scope 3. And we will share how we did it so that it becomes maybe a little bit easier to start.
Thanks, Kathleen. I think last question or comment, wouldn't it be good to consider already supported supplier front runners who have invested significantly in sustainability initiatives and are ready to positively impact both the environment and Siegwerk? This I give to you, Alina. Wouldn't it be good to consider that?
Yeah. We are considering them now more than ever, in the future even more so. And I think Arash showed it nicely how the Trinity moved to I don't know what comes after Trinity.
Yeah, it's a square.
It's a square. If you're a front runner, this gives you a really good start, and this gives you a heads up. We also had internal discussions how we can maybe highlight some of the advancements that some suppliers did, as it's a learning journey for all of us. But let's give each other a bit of time to figure out how to do that in detail. But being a front runner is definitely a really good spot to be in.
Thank you, Alina. Good. So I think the next two questions I can answer myself. Yeah, kindly, can you help personally if we want to work with agencies like SBTI and others? I think this is part of the whole enabling and also webinar program which we have. Yeah, so we are here to support. And the next question: will the presentation will be available for the participants? Yes, it will. It's part of the housekeeping rules. You will get the information after this session. Yeah. Seems that this is it. Alina, Kathleen, thanks for answering these questions. Sure. And we can move to the last agenda point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with this, I want to invite everybody back in for some Q&A. If you haven't done so yet, write your questions into the chat. It can be anything from, we use an acronym that you didn't understand, to something more specific. And for moderation, I will hand back to Arash and step to the side so they'll fit.
Thank you, Alina. Good. So what we'll do now in this Q&A session is read basically what you have posted in the chat, and go through question by question, and then address the questions to either Kathleen, Alina, or myself, and get those answered. Okay, let's start with the first one. PCF calculation sounds very complex and costly. If we don't have the tools or people for this, what to do? This I would give to you, Kathleen. Yeah.
So I hope I didn't scare you too much. Yes, it is not plug and play, but it is really possible. We started with this the same way. The first thing is start to look into your own emissions. So the scope 1 and the scope 2. And the carbon action module from EcoVadis can really help you with this because it guides you step by step. The next challenge then becomes the scope 3, because for this you need to have an overview of the carbon emissions of the raw material which you need to produce that specific product. And what we're anticipating to do later in the year, we will have webinars to show you how we did it. So to make it easier for you to get a start, we want to share it really on a practical basis, like what Excel sheets did we use, how do you look into the databases. But what is also important, start talking about the topic with your suppliers, because in the end, databases are still just a start, but we want you to work with your suppliers as well to reduce the emissions. It is manageable.
Let me just add one thing. So especially if you have many products, it can be really frightening to start. Pick 1 or 2, 3 products to start with. Ideally ones that you supply to Siegwerk. But of course, how to prioritize those is up to you. But it's not black and white. You can do that gradually.
Good, thank you. The next one is, I think, also for you, Kathleen, EcoVadis access question mark.
So we're now employing EcoVadis for 2 things. So one is the risk analysis on human rights and environment. And if you haven't done EcoVadis yet, you will get an invite from us, potentially also from other of your customers, because you can share then your score with everyone. The same we will do with the carbon action module. We have prioritized suppliers from whom, as I mentioned, we buy a lot of carbon, and up on request, we will also invite you to fill in the carbon action module.
Just one question that came up in the last session, so in the morning session, is the scorecard is not only for us. You can also share this with other customers. And I think this is really important because we want to make sure that this journey is it does not become sort of a bureaucratic nightmare, but to use tools that you actually have a benefit for too. And the scorecard is one of those examples. Use it as much as you can.
I do like the next question. To support your carbon reduction strategy, would sustainable bio-based raw materials be your top priority versus fossil-based raw materials? A question we really often hear in discussions, and this one I would give to you, Alina, directly. Yeah, it's a good one.
It's a very good one, and one that you can spend hours discussing, but I'm going to try to keep it short. So, of course, bio-based raw materials can be a really helpful lever in reducing the carbon footprint, especially for the overall packaging. So if we look at the entire value chain, what we're sometimes faced with as a challenge is that you actually need more energy to transform the bio-based raw material into a raw material that we use. And hence, sort of the product carbon footprint is actually not that much better if you do not take into account sort of all the carbon that has been captured by the plant. And the carbon that has been captured by the plant, based on the ISO standard that we're certified with, is only allowed to be counted once in the value chain. That is at the end. We still really like this as a strategy because if we zoom out and look at the overall packaging, it is beneficial in most cases. And there are also cases where bio-based raw materials actually need less processing to fossil-based. And then I think it's a no-brainer almost.
Thank you. Thank you, Alina. The next one is a very specific question, but still, I think, interesting for the group and shows also that many things need to be considered. Yeah? As a branded distributor representing global manufacturers for our PCF2U, should we get the official PCF numbers from the brand owners and adding our own scope 1 and 2 numbers to them? I don't know if someone can answer this question just like this, but it is a question, Kathleen.
Generally, yes, this is how it works. However, it is also a challenge because you need to make sure that the PCF data you receive from your suppliers are credible. So this is quite a challenge. But we have to start somewhere.
Good, thank you. Next one, if Siegwerk says we are high risk or gives us a low score, but we don't agree, can we explain our side or ask for a review? This I give to you.
Yeah, so the scorecard, we would always want to have a discussion about it because it is sort of an indicator, and especially if you have the feeling that you might not be fairly represented. And we as Siegwerk will not change the scorecards. That's something that we would then do together with EcoVadis, but having this conversation around it because no rating system is perfect. It's a first good assessment. And also, if we have a feeling somehow EcoVadis doesn't fit to you as a supplier for whatever reasons, we have the sustainability checklist. And it's also why we put this in place to have sort of an alternative just in case something's slightly off. But overall, we made really good experiences with the scorecards that we've received so far, and it makes it much easier to manage from our side, but also from your side, as mentioned, because you can leverage this with other suppliers, with other customers as well.
Thank you, Alina. The next question I also like very much. All these new requirements like PCF calculation, green energy, higher wages will increase our costs. Will Siegwerk consider these efforts when negotiating prices for our products? Answer, I think we discussed it at the beginning of this meeting. Basically, no. However, let me explain a little bit. Yeah? When it comes to the topics which are mentioned here, and generally the topic of sustainability, and this is what I wanted to express at the beginning, it is a prerequisite. It is something what we need anyway. Otherwise, we will even not start the negotiation regarding the prices. Yeah? So it is not something which is not there immediately. It is not something where you have to jump from 0 to 100, but it is something where basically we together need to walk the path and improve step by step. Yeah, it is. You could also call it a hygiene factor. You could also say we are going to raise the bar, but it is exactly like the expectations we have in terms of quality. Something what we cannot negotiate. It just has to be there. Otherwise, it's not fitting into our portfolio.
Maybe one addition is everybody has their package to carry. So we're investing in solar panels, in renewable electricity. We're investing in this program, for example. Our customers are investing, the brand owners are investing. So if ultimately everybody carries their fair share, it's going to be a fair game.
Thank you, Alina. Next question, also quite specific. Which base year did you use for your reduction targets? I believe this goes to the carbon reduction targets, right?
That was 2020.
2020. Yeah. Good. And then I believe it is the last question. Quite a long one. Is Siegwerk committed to following actual measurements, full scope, and taking that into consideration on an ongoing basis? For example, despite climate-related impacts, reducing incomes by 19% by 2050, global GDP is expected to more than double from current levels. How can a measurement of income impact not also consider where the global will be in terms of income?
That is definitely a very specific question. I will dive deep into the study and then look for the answer and present it and then send it out together with the presentation.
Good. Thank you, Kathleen. And I think one more we have. Often transport shipments by ship from far away, as an example, represents a small contribution to the PCF versus PCF of manufacturing or extraction of fossil or producing bio-based raw materials. Will globalization be an issue for Siegwerk? Question mark. Yeah. So maybe I can answer this question partially and then hand over to Kathleen and Alina. What we want to do is we want to improve from where we are today. Yeah? So when we are today, we are a global company. We do have a global footprint, and we also do have a global sourcing footprint. And we have no target to localize or regionalize our value chains. That's not the point. The point is that we want to reduce our emissions. So from where we are, we want to see how we can improve step by step. So if you are today an overseas supplier, we can also tomorrow improve our PCF with an overseas supplier. Doesn't mean that we go to a local one. Yeah.
Maybe just looking at the data, it's actually in the question already. Transport is usually the smallest part if we compare it to raw materials. So there is a good case for globalization also in the carbon context here.
Yeah. Next one is a comment. Interesting meeting. Good to hear that. We are a supplier of corn-based alcohol in Argentina, so we are very interested in what you shared. We are working on sustainability issues. Yeah, much appreciated. And I think the topic of bio-based raw materials we briefly touched. So it's an extra environment we are working in. As mentioned, we are going to reach out, and also this material here is going to be shared with you. Next one, suppliers who have already an EcoVadis rating also have to go all this process, question mark. Kathleen?
No, if you already have an EcoVadis rating, you can just share it with us. Maybe you've already been requested. Yeah, that's the beauty of it, doing it once and then being able to share it with multiple of your customers.
Excellent, thank you. So I think this is it. Thanks for the questions. And then we can basically move to the last topic of the agenda, which is the closing. Thank you. So we are coming to the summary and next steps. Which is basically just one slide, and you see a couple of headlines and bullets. I will briefly go through them. So our program, SustainUP, up our value chain. What are we going to do, and what is our it comes to sustainable procurement and Siegwerk. So first of all, we need an organization, and embedding the organization, embedding the topic of sustainable procurement in our organization has been done. Kathleen is here. She's managing the Supplier Sustainability Hub. Alina is here, Human Rights Officer. Kathleen reporting to Alina reporting to the CEO of the company. So I think the impact and the importance of this topic is quite clear and also embedded within Siegwerk. Second topic, setting and communicating expectations, what we are doing today. This is the kickoff. More is going to come and to follow. So we will be in intense exchange with you to see how we get the things managed. Next step for us then will be a risk and opportunity assessment and supplier prioritization. So we have a lot of suppliers, yeah. And obviously we will not talk to all of our suppliers, that's also clear. So building up a funnel and then selecting where are basically the chances and also the risks we are going to take, basically that's one of the steps going to come. And then, yes, there is nothing good until you do it, right? This is not a PowerPoint exercise, yeah, but we are going to bring commitment into action, so implementation and support. And I think this is really important and also the message of today's call here. Yeah? So we are expecting something, but we are also willing to invest something and also to support you and also willing to learn. Yeah? So I believe maybe also some people in this call are more mature than we are regarding this topic, and we can learn from you. Yeah? Looking forward to that one. Yeah, and last but not least, monitoring and continuous improvement. We are working with KPIs. We will share dashboards with you where you can see where you are, where we are, and find basically the gaps we then need to fill going forward. Good. So closing the session, yeah, with one sentence: sustainable products start with sustainable procurement. Yeah, start with you. Thanks, Kathleen, Alina, for being here, and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.